Well, welcome to another video by M9 Aviation. Today I'm just want to talk a little bit through using Ortho4XP to build ortho overlays. I see a lot of chatter on the different boards, either whether it's Facebook or Discord. People tend to have questions about what the different phases are and how to build the data, so I figured I'd just walk through how I do it. Certainly if you search out there, I'm sure that there are probably, if you search for 100 different ways to do it, you'll probably find 120 different ways to do it. But this is the way that I go about it. The first thing I wanted to do is just kind of explain what the different phases do. So, you know, well, to back up, there's really a couple different ways that you can build an ortho tile. One is you can do it all manually. The other way is you can do it in batch builds. I choose to do it manually, each individual tile, because then it gives me the ability to choose custom dem files. And I'm not sure that you can do that with a batch build. I'll have to look into that a bit more and to see if that's even possible. But typically, and I'm not going to go through how to install Ortho4XP. There are plenty of videos out there that tell you how you can find it, download it, and get it installed, and even how to build build some stuff. We'll talk specifically about the different steps here. So, what happens up here in the tile coordinates when you open the Earth tile map, that's going to show you. If you haven't done anything special with where the tiles are stored, it's going to show you the tiles that you've loaded. So I've got some tiles up here in Washington and Canada where I've been doing some flying, and I've got some tiles down here. These are all the tiles that I've built. I have not built a whole lot compared to some people that I've seen that have got most of the U.S. Built. But these are the tiles that I've built so far. But when you decide to go and build a tile somewhere, and I think the FS Economy group that I fly for is going to be doing is going to be having some work around billing, so that might be a good place to try to do a build here. So if you double click on that area, it highlights it in yellow, and it also fills in the active Latin long. So if you exit out of that, you'll see that Latin long has been moved over here. So that just basically tells Ortho4XP what tile you're going to be building. The custom build directory, I just leave it default. I think that it'll just default to wherever Ortho is installed. I just leave it that way so that all of the linkages between what Ortho thinks is out there and what actually is out there stay intact. The provider and zoom level, you can use the base source is basically where are you going to go and download the images, the overlay images. So I just use BI, which I think is the Bing. But you can do Google, you can do OSM. I mean, I've not used any of these other ones. I think in different parts of the world, these make a bit more sense. Again, I would leave it up to you guys to search for other YouTube videos or other more in-depth explanations about which sources might be best for your area. But I use BI for the US. The base zoom level it's the zoom level that it will download are all of the overlays. So if you think about it, if you were to open up, I don't know if I have it in here or not. If you open up Google Earth and you zoom in and out, every time you zoom in, that's a higher and higher zoom level. So the higher zoom level you go, the closer or the more detail you're getting in terms of the overlay that you're going to download. 16 I found is fairly decent for areas that you're going to be flying over, not necessarily flying to. So I use my base level at 16. I know a lot of guys use 17. Obviously, the higher number you go, the larger the amount of data that you're going to have to download and process. And quite honestly, once you get above 18, I don't think there's a lot of distinguishable difference between 18 and 19 other than file size. But I use a base zoom level of 16. And again, this is for everywhere that is not an airport. What I can do is I can pull up, I'll show you my config file here. Let's see here, Ortho config. We'll get this out of the way. So my Ortho config file that I use, I've done some customization here, and I'll be happy to post this as part of the video so people can use it for reference if they like. One of the settings that you can set that's in the config file that you can't find out here in the actual application is this, where is it? This area right here. So the default, again back here, this base zoom level this is the zoom level. It'll download all the tiles, but you can put some exclusions into that. In this case, what I've said is I've set this to true, which is cover airports with higher res. And if that's true, then what it'll do is for every airport that it detects within that tile, within a distance of what this value is set to, I've got it set to 10 kilometers, it will download zoom level 18 data for that. So the reason I've done that is, I kind of figure my rationale is that if I'm flying out of an airport, I want to have it look as real as possible. But once I've climbed to altitude, it doesn't really matter if that, if the detail is real high, because I'll be a few thousand to several thousands feet above ground. But as I come into the airport and I leave an airport, I really want to have much higher detail. So that's what I use for that. It seems to work fairly well. It will, of course, result when we go through the process. What you'll see happen is it is going to download quite a bit extra, or the tiles will be a lot bigger, the data will be a lot bigger for that zoom level 18. Okay, so that's what that is. The C-source, I'm not sure what C-source and zoom level are. I'm not an expert at this, obviously, but I just leave those for default. The minimum area, this is something that by default is set to 0.01. One of the other users, FS Economy users that I fly with, had posted on our Discord channel that he likes to use 001. It gives a bit more detail. So I'm going to try that with this and see what happens. And that's for step one. That's for the vector data, the OSM data. So if you think about this, Ortho, it builds everything up in layers, and I wish I had. I'd found a nice graphic somewhere. I should have pilfered or built my own. But it's a series of layers, almost like a layer cake that you have to go through in order to build up data. The OSM data is actually data that is primarily, I think, derived from OpenStreetView data. But it's basically data around what is in the world. I mean, it defines where streets are, where buildings are. So by default, it goes out to, I think, OpenStreetView, which, by the way, anybody can sign up for an account at OpenStreetView and go into their favorite airport and modify it so that it gets more accurate. But basically what happens when you click on this is it's going out to OpenStreetView, and it's downloading this OSM data. So it's downloading, got data about the airports. It's going to get about the waterways, rivers, streams, lakes. I believe it gets stuff around roads, where the roads are. So we'll give it a few seconds here to see if it works. So a lot of people have been complaining that this doesn't work here. It stops working. My guess is that enough people interested in building the Ortho that I don't know if the servers are just getting overloaded. Normally this only takes a few seconds to build, so my guess is that it's overloaded today. It typically dies here on the waterways as well. So it doesn't look like it's going to work, so what I'm going to do is just stop the process. I've had some luck. We'll see if it works today. Going into, so if I go into my Ortho4XP, let's see, it's in the OSM data. If I find the folder that it was working on, 45109. 45109. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, so we get rid of it. Now I'll start up my start up Ortho4XP again and give it another shot. Okay, so let's open up the tile map again. Get that back over here. We're gonna go a little bigger here. We're gonna go around billings. Exit. Let's try it again. See what happens. That looks a little bit better. Okay, so it took 10 seconds to go and get that data. So now we have the base data around all of these things: docks, coastlines, rivers, airports. The next thing is the base mesh. So the mesh is what determines, as near as I can tell, and there may be others that can correct me, but the base mesh is what controls the altitude, right? So when you download these images, you need it to drape over the different elevations, right? So when you got a mountain, you've got a hill, you want that to drape over it. So what the base mesh does is that that provides the data around what those elevations look like. I think Ortho4XP will actually, it's got some default stuff you can use. I choose to use a custom dem file, which from some of my watching of other videos seems to be apparently more accurate than what comes by default. So that's what I use. The data that I get, and I'll post this part of this link in the video as well, is this site here, but that appears to not be not be very responsive today. Luckily, I think I have that data downloaded already. But basically what they do is they've got a map of the world, and it's broken up into blocks that are quite a bit bigger than the blocks that you see as part of this map. Let's show a saved copy maybe. Okay, well, so this probably won't work if I try to click on it, but this is what the site looks like. The blocks are a bit bigger than the ortho blocks, so it's a little easier to get the data. I think the difficult part is you can't zoom in and out on this map, so that's a little painful. You kind of got to guess where you're at. So if I look over here, make our map a little bigger, and take a guess. So I don't know, Billings is just on the other side of this little mountain range, so if I take a guess there, I would say it's probably one of these two, either M12 or L12. Let's see if I happen to have that here. Alright, I do not have, I have L12. Do I have M12? I do not have M12, but let's look in L12 and just see here. What are we working on? We're working on 45109. Oh, it's in 45109. So I do have it. So L12. Okay, so what I would have done there is downloaded L12, the L12 tile. Again, I don't think it's going to work here because their site is hosed right now. Luckily, I already have it. So I would download that. That just comes in a zip file. You can unzip that file and put it anywhere you want. I basically just put it in a folder here where I've got all of the different tiles that I've downloaded. And you know, in it you'll find these are all of the dem files. And you can see that they're labeled by their coordinates that they cover. So again, we were just looking for 45109. So what I'm going to do up here is I'm going to go ahead and choose for a custom dem file, and we're going to go 45. Just got to get into L12. 45109. The other thing I've changed from default is this curve. I don't know if it's curve tool or what it stands for, but by default it's 3. Again, another suggestion was just to bring that down to 1, and I think what that does is it divides the mesh data up into more granular chunks. Again, with the whole concept of trying to get, you know, a more granular representation of what's actually going to be built here. All right, so once we've got that, we can go ahead and build the base mesh. So this doesn't typically take a real long time. Usually the one that takes the most amount of time is the build tile step. And so I don't know what we're going to do here for the build tile step. I guess if I don't have any streamers watching, we'll just let it go, and in the video I'll edit out the amount of time it takes to do that. So the number of mesh triangles, this is what this setting this to from a 3 to 1 as an increase the number of mesh triangles. I don't know what it would have normally done at 3, but it probably would have been, you know, more like 1,000,000. So it's almost doubled the amount of tiles, but you know, it didn't, even with that, it didn't take a whole lot. It only took 48 seconds. Okay, so now we've got again, we've got the basically the data that defines what all of the roads, streams, rivers, airports look like. We've got that OSM data. Now we've built the base mesh, which is all of the height data around the tile. And the next thing then we're going to go ahead and build the tile. These are the options I use. Check against white textures. I think this what this does is if it finds a tile that's blank, it'll exclude that so that you're not flying along and find a big white square in your data. And then complex mass. This is something that I checked again as per a suggestion. Quite honestly, I'm not sure what that does. So we'll do that to see if it makes any difference in our output. And then the mass widths are 10, which helps smooth the transition between the tile areas, where you've got tiles and where you don't have tiles. And I've increased this from 8 to 10 just to give me a little bit more mask area, or transition area, I guess is what I meant to say. Water ratio. One of the other guys in our group had this set to 0.1. I'm not sure what this does. I'd be interested to get feedback from anybody if they know what this value sets, but I'm going to leave it at 3. So we're going to go ahead and build the masks. Quite honestly, I can't explain what building the masks does. But we'll let it do its thing. This takes a little bit more time as well. So while we're kind of waiting for that, we can talk a little bit about the other steps. So the step 3 build tile, this will take quite a while, and the reason is this is the step where it actually goes out to, in this case, Bing, and it's actually downloading each of the pictures basically for the tile. So a couple of words of warning. One, it takes quite a bit of time, so when you're doing this, make sure you've got something else to do while this is happening. 2, because you're basically downloading high-res images. If I go out here and look at, well, let's see here, where is that? Oh, it's probably in the Ortho photos. That would probably make more sense with it. Okay, so what you're going to end up with is a data structure here. Again, if you don't modify the custom build directory, this will all be within the confines of the Ortho4XP folder that when you installed it under Ortho photos. And each tile will have its own directory. And in the directory, you're going to have 2 or more, probably 2. One is the base level, one is the zoom level for around the airports. If we go in there, now this is where your selection of things are. So anyway, so what I was meaning to say here, okay, so this finished. Let's go ahead and get the build tile going, because that'll take a while. So yeah, 1, it takes a lot of time. 2, it's going to download a lot of data. So you all want to be a bit cognizant of how much of this you're building, because it's going to have an impact on your internet connection, both in terms of speed, because it's going to suck up a bunch of bandwidth, and also in terms if you happen to have any data caps. Downloading all this data may push you over the data caps. I'm lucky because I have a couple of systems that in essence give me unlimited data and pretty high speed, so it goes fairly quick, and I don't have to worry too much about it. So what this is doing is it's going to build, it's downloading downloading these images, and then it's converting them, and it's mapping them to the texture files that we built up here. So as it downloads each image, it's wrapping it around the detail. this mesh scenery, I guess we can talk a little bit about that while we're waiting for the textures to download, because the last step that I work with is to build the overlays, and the overlay is kind of that last layer on the cake. It's basically what populates all of the dynamic objects, or tells X-Plane how to populate all the dynamic objects on top of the photo ortho, which is on top of the elevation mesh, which sits on top of the data. By default, if you don't do anything, it's just going to use, again, a default set of overlay data. But there is there's a guy out there on alpilotx.net that has got this data called HG mesh scenery. That's a much higher definition mesh data than what comes by default. I guess he spends quite a bit of time going out there and tuning and tweaking it. And what you'll find is that the roads will match up much more closely to what they're supposed to be. Elevations will look a lot better. Areas where there's supposed to be trees will look a lot better. Buildings, cities, towns, they'll look a lot more realistic because this mesh is that much higher definition. So this is a site that you can go get this. So the way you install it is you create this folder called ZZZ HD Global Scenery. But if you look in it, again, each one of the squares represented here are going to have its own folder. It looks like I've got 4110 and 4120. And so all you just need to do is you just need to make sure it's in that folder. And then when we get back here to the Ortho4XP, you'll specify this folder. And then what will happen is when you do this last step to build the overlay, rather than using the default data, it'll actually go out to that folder and use the HD mesh to really populate. When you start using the ortho data, you start running into people saying, well, I did the ortho and now I can't see any of my airports. All I see is a flat picture on the ground. There's no trees, there's no autogen. Or the other way around, where they find they can't see any ortho, they didn't think it made any difference. So the way X-Plane works it is, if you go into your X-Plane directory and you go to custom scenery, there's this file called scenerypacks.ini. And what that is that's the initialization file that tells X-Plane when it starts up what all scenery it should load up. And so what you're going to find is about airports that you want to load, custom airports that you may have purchased. It's going to have information in there about different libraries that you might use that either are required by custom airports or you've used yourself to build your custom airports. Then you're also going to have all of your ortho, and then at the bottom you have your HD mesh. So this file is pretty important in how it loads. So it actually tells X-Plane, again, all of the stuff to load, but it builds it like a layer cake. And if you layer something in there incorrectly, you're going to get results that you're not expecting. Again, you'll get either a completely flat earth with no autogen or no 3D buildings or anything, or vice versa, right? So this is very confusing, was very confusing to me, still very confusing to me exactly what goes where. I downloaded a nice tool called Xorganizer. I would highly recommend anybody that's doing any custom scenery, whether it's ortho, whether it's airports. Recently been updated to version 1.2 to support X-Plane 11, so I haven't found any issues with that. This is where it really is powerful. It's the custom scenery thing. So what he's done, what the developer has done is he's built out the different categories of things, and he's put them in an order on which they should be loaded within X-Plane. So it's pretty smart at finding things. So when we're done with building this mesh and link it, and then we were to start this program up, it would find the new folder here, and it would then automatically categorize it into photo scenery. And then what it does is it modifies your scenerypacks.ini file and puts everything in the right order for you. So I've been very happy with this. since I've been using it, I haven't found a situation where stuff seems to be out of order. It takes the guessing game out. Highly recommend anybody using that if you're not using it. Again, another free tool that you can find out there. One thing to keep in mind, I'll just mention this because it got me as well, is there's these options up. The autosave is the big one, so by default I think it comes off. So turn that on, then when you make a change, immediately it will, when you close the app here, it will actually write that file for you. Anyway, I would check it out. I'll try to find a link for that and put it in the description of the video so people have that as well. So, alright, so we're done doing the building of the tiles. We've got all the downloads there. So last thing we'll do is we'll do that build overlay that we talked about earlier. Okay, so that finished that in 52 seconds. So I didn't, we could add it all up. I would guess that took probably about 20 minutes or so to build that set of tiles, maybe a little longer. But now we should have all the data. Now, one important thing to remember, because again, I didn't use a custom build directory, is all of this data, it's sitting in the Ortho4XP folder. So all the photos are sitting here. You know, we were working on 45109. Now we have a 45109 here. So all the photos sit here. All of the OSM data here, all of the tiles that are generated, all of that data sits in this folder. So if I just go and start X-Plane up, you're not going to see anything because that data technically needs to be in the custom scenery folder. So if we look at X-Plane custom scenery, you'll see we don't have a folder called 45109, but we do have a bunch of links. But if you go back to the Earth tile map after you're done building it, now you see we've got this it's in a kind of a light blue color. That basically represents the fact that we built that tile. To get them to go dark blue, if you look at the directions here, if you control click on it, what's going to happen is that's going to automatically create a link in your X-Plane folder. So if we go back out here and then go back into custom scenery, now we should have a symlink 45109, and if we follow it, now you've got all of this data here. So that's a pretty important step once you're done. Again, if you don't do that, or you don't copy that data, resulting data, into your folder, then neither Xorganizer nor X-Plane will find that data. I want to fire up Xorganizer. All you really have to do is start it and close it. I start it usually and look to show the preview to make sure that it added my 45109 in here, which it did. Okay, great. So you open it, you close it, and sure enough, if we go look at the custom scenery in the scenery any folder, we'll have a 45109 and a nicely ordered and stacked sequence. Alright, so let's do a new flight again. We're in Billings again. We'll start. Again, it may take a little bit longer now to load because it's got to load all this extra scenery. So some of the things that you're going to notice, I'll just kind of point them out now. You can see that, you know, particularly over here as we get a little higher, you know, while it's not 3D rendered in all cases, you can actually see that this must be part of Billings, right? And you can see the buildings. And this is a photo. It's a photo. It's not a 3D generated thing. But if you're flying at this altitude, you know, it's going to look like you would expect it to look, right? So you've got all of this stuff out here, which is actually part of, I guess would be Billings, right? Versus here, you can see there was actually nothing out there. It was kind of a barren area. So we've got some improvements there. You know, look at the runway here. Again, you can see some of these gravel roads, which aren't going to be represented over here. You can see, you know, looks like there's a ball field or something over here. That's not represented over here. The airport itself, you know, it's going to show more of the grass and stuff that's around the airport, so that looks just much more realistic. So you can start to see the benefits of having that ortho. Again, it looks a lot more realistic in terms of the grass, and you've got the roads that follow along here. You've got a much more realistic representation of Billings, where again there's nothing here but a few auto-generated roads, and there might be a couple buildings and trees. But you know, with the photo, you'll see that, you know, these look like trees. And again, to get a bit more perspective on it. You know, we're not very far above the airport. If I continue to climb, you know, to what would be a cruising altitude. Yeah, so if you look, and once you start getting at altitude, I mean, that looks like you're flying over a real city. You know, it doesn't matter that there's not a huge amount of 3D autogen, but where there is autogen, like in this area right in here, you can see that it's probably done a much better job of creating that autogen than it did over here. Right? There's like a couple houses there and a couple roads, whereas here, because we're using the HD mesh data, it's going to start to fill in those houses a lot better. A significant improvement in the visuals of what you would get in flying around using native stuff. Oh yeah, this over here is pretty cool. Here, just how it mapped this and textured all of this stuff. It's going to look a lot better than the default over here. Oh yeah, look at that. Yeah, you just can't beat the Ortho. Can't beat it at all. So appreciate you watching. Until next time, I'm signing off.